The city does not wake gently. It rises like a creature stretching its limbs, neon lights flickering against the last breaths of night, taxi horns echoing through the concrete canyons, and the distant hum of trains shaking the underbelly of Manhattan. In the early 1930s, New York is more than a place. It is a battlefield disguised as a metropolis. Power is traded in whispers, loyalty is measured in blood, and every shadow holds the ghost of a deal, a betrayal, or a promise. And in this world of noise and motion, one man moves quietly, deliberately, like a chess master playing 10 boards at once. His name is Charles "Lucky" Luciano, and while history remembers him as the architect of organized crime in America, the truth is far more complex, far more subtle. Because Luciano didn't conquer the underworld with brute force alone. His revolution was silent, psychological, and built on an understanding of human nature more advanced than any gangster of his era. Picture him stepping out of a dimly lit club in Midtown, adjusting his tailored coat, the faint glow of a street lamp catching the edge of his fedora. To the average passerby, he might look like any other well-dressed immigrant who carved out a piece of the American dream. But beneath the polished shoes and the calm demeanor lies a mind shaped by poverty, violence, and the relentless urge to control chaos. Luciano walked through a world defined by disorder but saw the possibility of order where others saw only opportunity. He understood instinctively what businessmen, politicians, and war generals understood: that power must be structured, predictable, and above all, centralized. This realization did not strike him in a single dramatic moment. It grew in him, piece by piece, as he observed the frantic, ego-driven world of gangsters tearing each other apart for scraps. New York's criminal underworld at this time is an ecosystem on the verge of collapse. Italian gangs fight Sicilian bosses, Jewish outfits clash with Irish families, and every dispute spirals into murder. Streets run red over petty insults or ancient grudges carried across the ocean. Luciano watches it all with a strategist's eye, recognizing that this endless cycle of revenge is not power but weakness. Even as a young man beaten, kidnapped, and nearly killed in the city's infamous gang wars, he carries within him an unshakable belief that survival is not about strength, it is about adaptation. If the old bosses cling to their codes of honor and tradition like relics of a dying world, then he will build something new, something that reflects the future rather than the past. Yet the foundation of this transformation begins not in conference rooms or mob summits, but in the shadows of city alleys and immigrant tenements, where Luciano learns to read people with unnerving precision. He knows when a man is lying by the twitch of an eye, when he is afraid by the stiffness in his shoulders, and when ambition outweighs loyalty by the tone of his voice. This psychological sensitivity becomes his most dangerous weapon. Violence can eliminate an enemy, but understanding him can control an empire. And so, as prohibition fuels a new breed of opportunity, Luciano begins to shape alliances that others dismiss as unnatural. Italians, Jews, Irish, he sees no ethnicity, no tradition, no old-world boundaries. He sees only talent, loyalty, efficiency. In this simple but radical belief lies the spark of his silent revolution. But revolutions are not born in peace, they are forged in tension. Every step Luciano takes toward modernizing the Mafia threatens powerful men who cling to the old ways. Men who believe bloodlines matter more than brains, who believe respect is earned through fear alone. To them, Luciano is a dangerous anomaly, a young upstart who dares to imagine a world where the Mafia is not a collection of warring tribes but a united network, structured like a corporation and fueled by shared profit rather than personal vendetta. They whisper about him in dimly lit restaurants, plot his downfall in smoke-choked backrooms, and underestimate the calm resolve behind his charming smile. Yet Luciano's genius lies in patience. He does not rush, he does not provoke. He studies, he waits, he chooses his moment. The world around him grows louder, police raids, murders in broad daylight, the thunder of bootleg trucks rumbling across state lines, while he grows quieter, more focused. The true transformation he intends to bring about will not arrive with fanfare or dramatic declarations. It will come slowly, invisibly, through new partnerships, new rules, and new expectations. A silent revolution. As the story begins, the audience stands on the edge of a world about to change forever. A world where the old laws of power are crumbling, where a new kind of mastermind is rising. One who understands that the greatest empires are not built on violence alone, but on the structure that lies beneath it. Luciano is not yet the kingmaker, not yet the legend. He is a man sharpening his intelligence, forging alliances, and quietly preparing to redesign an entire criminal civilization. This is the story of how one man turned chaos into order, enemies into partners, and crime into a system so sophisticated that its echoes still shape modern organized crime today. It is the story of a revolution with no anthem, no banners, no ceremonies, only strategy, ambition, and silence. The underworld of early 20th century America is a place without structure, without vision, and without any force strong enough to hold its fragments together. Long before Lucky Luciano begins reshaping it, the criminal landscape is a chaotic maze of rivalries and ancient grudges, where violence is not a last resort but a daily language. Each ethnic group, Italian, Irish, Jewish, Polish, and even remnants of older street families, operates in isolation, clinging to its own customs and distrustful of everyone else. These gangs are not unified enterprises. They are feudal kingdoms ruled by temperamental bosses who see themselves less as organizers and more as warlords. Their power is measured not by strategic influence but by how many soldiers they can summon and how quickly they can spill blood when challenged. At the core of this dysfunction lies the Sicilian Mafia's American branch, dominated by the so-called Mustache Petes. These old-world traditionalists see crime through a medieval lens: family honor, regional alliances, and vendetta-style justice. They believe leadership belongs only to men born in Sicily, men who follow the ancient codes of silence and unquestioned obedience. Their worldview cannot adapt to the reality of American streets, where opportunity demands flexibility and money moves faster than tradition. They scoff at alliances with Jews or Irish criminals, rejecting the idea that business should override bloodline. In their minds, the Mafia must remain a closed society, ruled by heritage rather than innovation. This stubborn adherence to old rules becomes a fatal flaw. While prohibition creates unprecedented wealth and new criminal markets, the Mustache Petes cling to outdated rituals that hold the entire underworld back. Bosses refuse to modernize, refuse to cooperate, and refuse to recognize that America is not Sicily. The streets of New York become battlegrounds where personal slights escalate into full-scale wars, and every minor dispute threatens to ignite an explosion of violence. Instead of building infrastructure to control profits, these bosses obsess over territorial pride and family rivalries, ensuring that any success is temporary and fragile. Money flows like a river, but control is always slipping through their fingers. On the Jewish side of the underworld, men like Arnold Rothstein and Meyer Lansky begin to think beyond local turf, envisioning crime as a national enterprise with networks stretching across multiple cities. Yet even their progressive approach cannot overcome the instability created by constant Italian infighting. Meanwhile, the Irish gangs, though formidable, are plagued by internal disputes and police infiltration. No single group has the vision or courage to step back and see the bigger picture. Crime in America is a mosaic with no frame, no structure, and no one strong, or daring, enough to impose order on the madness. The result is a city simmering with danger. Shootouts erupt in broad daylight, kidnappings become common currency, and neighborhoods live under the shadow of unpredictable gang warfare. Police departments, riddled with corruption, struggle to keep up. Judges are bribed, politicians threatened, and entire precincts bought and sold like commodities. New York becomes a place where power is temporary, loyalty is brittle, and the only constant is fear. The criminal underworld mirrors the turbulence of a nation still defining itself, raw, young, and desperate for direction. As this chaos intensifies, a quiet shift begins beneath the surface. Younger gangsters, born or raised in America, grow increasingly frustrated with the Mustache Pete's rigid ideology. They see the flaws in the old system, its inefficiency, its obsession with tradition, its inability to adapt to new economic realities. Among these younger men are ambitious figures like Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, and, of course, the rising strategist Lucky Luciano. They understand that the criminal world cannot survive if it remains trapped in the past. Wealth, power, and influence are no longer tied to Sicilian rituals. They are tied to modern organization, cross-ethnic partnerships, and the ability to think like businessmen rather than feudal lords. But this generational shift is not yet a revolution. It is merely tension waiting to ignite. Before any new order can rise, the old one must crumble under its own weight. And crumble it does, slowly, violently, and with devastating consequences. The Castellamarese War, one of the bloodiest mafia conflicts in American history, erupts as rival bosses Joe Masuria and Salvatore Maranzano battle for dominance. Their war is not a strategic confrontation but a reckless clash driven by pride and stubbornness, dragging the entire underworld into chaos. Soldiers die in the streets for causes they barely understand, families are torn apart, and business suffers daily. This war becomes the ultimate symbol of the old world's failure. It exposes the emptiness of the so-called codes, the fragility of leadership based on tradition, and the foolishness of fighting old battles in a new country. It also reveals the enormous gap between what the Mafia is and what it could be. Amidst this turmoil, Luciano watches carefully. He sees not just bloodshed but opportunity. He recognizes that the underworld's greatest enemy is not the police, not rival gangs, and not even poverty. Its greatest enemy is disorganization. Before Luciano begins his transformation, the criminal world is a storm without a center, violent, unstable, and unsustainable. It is a world yearning for structure but unable to create it. A world powerful enough to shape cities yet too fractured to control itself. This is the world Luciano inherits, studies, and ultimately vows to rebuild, not through fear alone, but through a silent revolution that will bring order to chaos and turn scattered gangs into a unified empire. In this landscape of disorder, Luciano's future role becomes inevitable. If the underworld is a fractured kingdom, then he is the one who will become its quiet architect, reshaping not just who holds power, but how power itself is defined. The world before him is collapsing under its own weight, and he is waiting in the shadows, preparing to build something entirely new from the ruins. He begins as a boy pressed against the rough stone walls of Lercurafridi, a small Sicilian town where poverty is not a condition but a permanent atmosphere. Charles Luciano is born Salvatore Lucania, the child of a miner whose hands are permanently stained with earth, and a mother whose quiet strength holds the household together despite the constant threat of hunger. Sicily at the turn of the century is a place of beauty wrapped in hardship, sunburned fields, narrow village streets, and a culture shaped by centuries of invasion and survival. From the moment he can understand words, young Salvatore learns about fear, pride, and silence. The Mafia of Sicily is not a legend. It is a living presence, a shadow that stretches over every family, every business, every whispered conversation. When the Lucania family boards a ship for America, the boy carries with him no idea of crime, power, or empire. He carries only hope, hope that New York will offer what Sicily cannot. But when he reaches Lower Manhattan, that hope does not blossom, it collides with reality. The tenement buildings of the Lower East Side are overcrowded cages stuffed with thousands of immigrants chasing the same dream. The streets stink of smoke and sweat, the hallways are infested with rats, and fights erupt daily between desperate boys who all want to prove they belong. This is the crucible that shapes him, not Sicily's traditions but America's brutality. Salvatore discovers quickly that America respects strength, not origin. A child who cannot defend himself is mercilessly targeted. He speaks with an accent, his clothes are worn and his pockets are empty, 3 reasons for other boys to mock him, beat him, or steal from him. It is here that he first learns the art of adaptation. He begins to study the streets the same way others study books, recognizing patterns in behavior, learning who fears what, who wants what, and who is willing to do what. He understands that to stay invisible is dangerous, to stand out is dangerous, the only safe place is to be useful. By his early teens, the boy who once clung to his mother's skirt becomes a street-smart negotiator. He begins earning pennies by offering protection to smaller kids, charging them a small fee to walk with him, ensuring they avoid the fists of stronger bullies. It is the earliest form of racketeering, but to him, it is simply survival. When someone refuses to pay, he does not fight them immediately. He waits until the moment is perfect. He learns that timing can be more effective than brute force. He learns that fear can be engineered. And most importantly, he learns that power is not about who throws the punch. It is about who chooses when the punch should be thrown. As he grows older, the neighborhood becomes a classroom where he studies human instincts with almost scientific precision. He sees how greed changes a man's posture, how guilt tightens his jaw, how ambition sharpens his tone. He notices how people lie differently depending on what they fear losing. This observational skill becomes his most lethal talent, far more dangerous than any weapon. Guns can kill. Intelligence can rule. It is around this time that he earns the nickname Lucky. Some attribute it to narrow escapes from violence, others to gambling wins, some even to superstitions that follow him like a shadow. But the truth is more psychological than mystical. Luciano creates his own luck. He knows when to run, when to stay, when to make eye contact, and when to look away. He judges threats not emotionally but analytically, calculating risk in seconds the way a businessman reads a ledger. He does not gamble without knowing the odds. He does not fight without understanding the consequences. His luck is discipline disguised as instinct. The turning point in his youth arrives when he meets a boy who thinks differently, Meyer Lansky. Lansky is quiet, sharp-eyed, and unemotional, the kind of boy who can calculate numbers faster than adults. Their first interaction is not friendly, it is cautious. Two young minds measuring each other's worth. But soon they recognize something rare. Neither wants to be a foot soldier in someone else's war. Both dream of something larger, something structured, something strategic. Their friendship becomes a partnership, and their partnership becomes a blueprint. They imagine an underworld that does not resemble the chaos around them. They imagine an empire. Through the 1910s and early 1920s, Luciano's reputation grows. He begins running errands for older gangsters, but he is never content with being a mere follower. He absorbs information like a sponge: how shipments move, how profits are divided, how bribes are paid, how alliances are formed. When older thugs dismiss him as a kid, he listens silently, storing their mistakes in his memory. He sees how stubbornness destroys opportunity, how anger clouds judgment, how ego ruins deals. He promises himself he will not repeat their errors. His near-death experience in 1929, kidnapped, beaten, stabbed, and left for dead, marks another turning point. Most men would retreat after such trauma. Luciano analyzes it. He identifies the enemies, the motives, the weaknesses, and he returns stronger, colder, and more determined. The violence does not harden him, it clarifies him. The attack becomes his final lesson. Survival is not enough. Control is everything. By the time Prohibition transforms America into a playground for illegal fortune, Luciano is no longer just a street kid but a rising strategist. The city sees him as a charming gangster with a gambler's smile, but beneath that polished exterior resides a mind already designing the future. He understands that New York's underworld is broken, but he also understands it can be rebuilt. His youth has taught him that every empire begins with a vision, every leader with a wound, and every revolution with a quiet promise made in the darkness. He was shaped by poverty, forged by violence, and sharpened by observation. Now he stands at the threshold of power, carrying with him the lessons of the streets, the wisdom of survival, and the ambition to reinvent the very meaning of organized crime. The boy from Sicily is gone. In his place stands a man with enough intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness to change the destiny of the American underworld forever. He rises not in a single leap but in a series of calculated ascents, each one shaped by the streets, the people, and the shifting tides of New York's criminal world. By the time the 1920s roar into full swing, the skinny Sicilian boy who once guarded school kids for pennies has transformed into a young man with influence stretching far beyond his modest surroundings. Prohibition has turned the country into a land of opportunity for those willing to take risks, and Luciano recognizes, earlier than most, that the Volstead Act is not a barrier but an invitation. America wants liquor. He intends to supply it. And in that desire he sees not just profit but the chance to build something bigger than his own reputation, an empire. He begins by aligning himself with the most dangerous and unpredictable force in the city, the Manhattan bootlegging scene. It is here that he joins forces with Arnold Rothstein's network, working alongside men who view crime as a business rather than a vendetta. Rothstein himself becomes a silent mentor, teaching Luciano the value of structure, bookkeeping, and discipline. Rothstein treats gambling halls the way bankers treat financial firms, and Luciano absorbs every detail. He studies profit margins, supply chains, transportation methods, and even how to launder money through legitimate businesses. Each lesson becomes a blueprint, each insight a stepping stone. The underworld is crowded with men who can shoot, few can strategize. Luciano intends to become the latter. His friendships deepen during this time, especially with Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. Lansky brings the cold mathematics of business, the kind of intelligence that can turn chaos into predictable profit. Siegel brings the unshakable loyalty and violent precision that every rising boss needs. Together they form a trio that blends brains, charisma, and force. Many gangsters operate alone, consumed by ego or paranoia. Luciano understands the power of shared ambition. He knows that no empire can be built by a single mind. It requires a collective vision, a synergy between complementary strengths. Yet his rise is not without conflict. As he grows in influence, he becomes entangled with Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masuria, the self-proclaimed king of the Italian underworld. Masuria is a traditionalist, a mustache Pete who clings to old-world customs with unwavering stubbornness. He sees Luciano not as a partner to be cultivated but as an asset to be controlled. Luciano, however, is not the sort of man who tolerates chains, even gold-plated ones. Though he works under Masuria, he observes the older man's paranoia, his inefficiency, and his inability to adapt to the new criminal economy Prohibition has created. Masuria's world is built on fear. Luciano dreams of a world built on profit. This tension sets the stage for one of the most pivotal strategic shifts of his life. Luciano begins to move quietly between factions, forging alliances where others see only enemies. He befriends men within rival gangs, negotiates terms that allow cooperation instead of constant war, and extends opportunities to gangsters whom the old bosses refuse to trust. He becomes a bridge between groups that would normally spill blood rather than speak. This ability to navigate social networks, not just enforce them, becomes one of his defining traits. Power, he realizes, comes not from control alone but from collaboration. His rise is also fueled by charisma. Unlike many gangsters who lead through intimidation, Luciano leads through connection. Men like working for him because he listens. He recognizes talent. He gives opportunities. He rewards loyalty not with empty praise but with real business. To those beneath him, he offers advancement. To those beside him, he offers partnership. To those above him, he offers the illusion of obedience while quietly constructing his own destiny. He is the kind of figure who can make a man believe he is essential, even when he is being replaced. That psychological mastery becomes the unseen engine of his ascent. But power in the underworld is always fragile, always contested. Luciano's expansion threatens Masuria's authority, and whispers begin circulating through the Italian neighborhoods. The kid is too ambitious. He wants too much too fast. The mustache Petes, clinging to their traditional hierarchies, suspect him of undermining their control. In truth, Luciano is doing something even more dangerous in their eyes. He is modernizing. He is building alliances outside the Sicilian bloodline. He is shaping a new type of leadership that rejects old-world thinking. And tradition fears innovation as much as it fears betrayal. Meanwhile, Luciano strengthens his influence in the bootlegging trade. He streamlines distribution routes, implements quality control over the alcohol supply, and negotiates deals that eliminate unnecessary turf wars. He understands that every bullet fired is money lost. The old bosses glorify violence. Luciano views it as an expense. This mindset separates him from nearly every gangster of his era. He is not interested in ruling through chaos. He wants efficiency, structure, and predictability. As Luciano's network expands, so does his insight into human behavior. He sees the weaknesses of rivals, the greed of allies, the blind spots of traditional bosses. He notices the hunger for leadership among younger gangsters who are tired of fighting wars ignited by aging men clinging to obsolete ideologies. The Castellamarese tensions begin to simmer, and Luciano realizes that the old world is approaching its breaking point. The underworld is preparing for a war it does not yet recognize, but he does. And he is preparing for it in silence. His rise through blood and brotherhood is defined by learning, observing, and innovating. He takes the raw material of the underworld, fear, ambition, violence, and reshapes it into something structured and scalable. Every partnership he forms, every deal he brokers, every risk he takes is part of a long-term vision he rarely speaks aloud. Because Luciano is not building for the present. He is building for the future. By the cusp of the 1930s, he is no longer just Masuria's protege or a promising young gangster. He is a rising force whose influence reaches deep into every corner of Prohibition's dark economy. The kid from Sicily has grown into a man whose ideas threaten the very foundations of the old Mafia order. The alliances he forms, the lessons he learns, and the risks he takes are all pointing toward an inevitable transformation, one that will reshape the American underworld forever. Luciano is no longer climbing. He is building. Brick by brick, connection by connection, betrayal by betrayal, he is constructing an empire in silence, waiting for the right moment to reshape the criminal world into the image he has carried in his mind since his youth. A world where power is earned, structure is respected, and crime is not chaos but business. The Code of Omerta is more than a set of rules. It is a psychological fortress built from centuries of fear, honor, and survival. Before Lucky Luciano begins reshaping the Mafia into a modern, corporate-style empire, he must first navigate and eventually challenge this ancient code. The Mustache Petes worship Omerta as if it were holy scripture. To them, silence is not merely strategic, it is sacred. A man who breaks this code is not just a traitor, he is a ghost, a dead man walking. The Sicilian belief system treats secrecy as oxygen, and loyalty as the only currency that truly matters. But for Luciano, who grew up in the chaotic streets of New York rather than the rigid villages of Sicily, Omerta becomes both a shield and a prison. To understand how deeply embedded these rules are, one must understand the culture they were born from. In Sicily, where mistrust of government runs deeper than blood itself, omerta is a defensive mechanism. The police are enemies, the authorities are corrupt, and survival often depends on silence. Back home, men who cooperated with officials were viewed as less than human. This isn't simply social pressure, it is psychological warfare. A boy learns from an early age that his tongue is a weapon, one that must be controlled at all times. This culture shapes every Sicilian immigrant who steps onto American soil. Even in New York, thousands of miles from Sicily's rugged landscape, these beliefs cling tightly, refusing to fade. Luciano, raised partly in this Sicilian environment and partly in the ruthless diversity of New York, grows up with one foot in each world. He respects the purpose behind omerta, the need for secrecy, discipline, and unity, but he also recognizes its limitations. The old bosses treat omerta as an unbreakable wall, something that prevents outsiders from learning about their inner workings. But Luciano sees how that wall also divides allies, blocks communication, and creates bottlenecks in decision-making. Silence protects the organization, but too much silence cripples it. He watches older men act with paranoia, refusing to share information or delegate tasks. They hide behind tradition as if the past can save them from the future. To Luciano, this rigid mentality is a dangerous weakness. In a rapidly evolving underworld fueled by prohibition, information must flow, decisions must be swift, and leadership must be adaptable. The mustache Petes, however, cling to omerta like a superstition. They refuse to collaborate with non-Italians because the code says outsiders cannot be trusted. They refuse to modernize business methods because the code forbids breaking certain hierarchical customs. They refuse to see the potential in young men like Lansky or Siegel because they are not Sicilian. Luciano understands that if he follows the code without question, he will become a prisoner of tradition, just like the bosses who rule through fear instead of strategy. But the code does more than restrict. It shapes the psychology of everyone within the Mafia. It fosters a climate where emotions must be buried, where vulnerability is fatal, where trust is earned through shared crimes rather than shared values. A man lives knowing that any slip, any wrong word, any display of fear, can lead to his execution. This creates a culture of performance, where every gangster must constantly act as the ideal mafioso, fearless, loyal, silent, honorable. Luciano observes how this performance exhausts men, turning them into paranoid shadows of themselves. He also sees how it fuels the endless cycle of vendettas. A single insult demands blood. A minor betrayal demands execution. Omerta ensures silence, but it also ensures stagnation. For Luciano, the most dangerous aspect of omerta is its ability to mask weakness. Older bosses hide their insecurities behind the code, pretending that tradition alone gives them power. They refuse to negotiate with rivals, refusing to admit that cooperation might yield greater profit. They demand absolute obedience, believing it is the only way to maintain control. But Luciano, shaped by the American streets, understands that real power does not come from fear alone. It comes from respect, influence, and mutual benefit. In his mind, omerta should be a tool, not a cage. As he rises in influence, Luciano begins to subtly reshape how the code is applied. He never disrespects it openly, doing so would be suicide. Instead, he manipulates its interpretations. He uses the code to unify his closest allies while bending it to justify new partnerships. He keeps the essence, loyalty, secrecy, discipline, but strips away the parts that prevent progress. When he forms alliances with Jewish and Irish gangsters, he does so quietly outside the old boss's gaze, breaking the spirit of the code while maintaining its appearance. When questioned, he invokes omerta as a defense, claiming he is simply protecting business. He turns tradition into a weapon of reform. This strategy becomes critical in the events leading up to the Castellamarese War. Luciano uses omerta to hide his intentions, mask his alliances, and outmaneuver rival factions. The old bosses, blinded by their faith in tradition, underestimate him. They assume the code makes him predictable, loyal, controllable. They do not realize that Luciano's true loyalty is not to the past but to the future. In his hands, omerta becomes a form of psychological leverage. He rewards loyalty with opportunity. He protects his men in ways the old bosses never did. He builds trust not through fear alone but through fairness and consistency. By doing so, he creates a new interpretation of the code, one built not on blind obedience but on mutual benefit. The younger generation responds to this instinctively. They see in Luciano a leader who understands secrecy but refuses to be ruled by superstition. A leader who respects tradition but serves progress. A leader who can transform a code meant for villages into a system fit for an American empire. The evolution of Omerta under Luciano's influence becomes the foundation for everything that follows. It is the psychological bridge between the old Mafia and the new syndicate. It allows him to unify gangs that once would have killed each other on sight. It gives him the credibility to challenge aging bosses while the freedom to innovate behind their backs. The code once defined the Mafia. Under Luciano, the Mafia will define the code. In the end, the code of Omerta does not disappear. It evolves. It becomes sharper, more strategic, more adaptable. It becomes a weapon in the hands of a revolutionary mind. And as Luciano prepares to reshape the entire underworld, the ancient Sicilian oath of silence becomes the quiet foundation upon which he builds the largest criminal organization America has ever seen. They call them the Mustache Petes, old-world bosses with heavy accents, thick mustaches, and minds rooted firmly in the past. These men rule with the stiff pride of Sicilian tradition, clinging to customs older than the country they now inhabit. To them, leadership is inherited, not earned. Authority is based on birth, not brilliance. Their power depends on fear, and their decisions are fueled more by pride than strategy. But as the American underworld expands with prohibition money, their worldview becomes not just outdated, but dangerous. And lucky Luciano can see with startling clarity that unless someone challenges these relics of the old world, the Mafia will destroy itself from the inside. The Mustache Petes run their organizations as if they are still walking through the narrow streets of Palermo. They refuse to work with non-Italians, insisting that only Sicilians can be trusted. They refuse to adopt new business practices, believing that secrecy and intimidation alone will keep profits flowing. They distrust innovation, despise delegation, and consider collaboration with Jews or Irish criminals an insult to their bloodline. Their minds are cages, locked by memories of the old country. The American landscape, vast, diverse, brimming with opportunities, confuses them. They cling to their outdated methods because it is all they know. To Luciano, this is not just inefficient, it is suicidal. He watches respected bosses like Joe Masuria and Salvatore Maranzano cling to authority by default, tightening their grip even as their empires crumble. They micromanage every decision, hoard power, and punish any form of independent thought. Even minor disagreements become mortal offenses. Their men follow them not out of respect, but out of fear of reprisal. And in an era where the underworld is expanding rapidly, that fear becomes a liability. Fear breeds paranoia. Paranoia breeds instability. Instability breeds war. As tensions escalate between the Masuria and Maranzano factions, Luciano finds himself trapped in a deadly game of loyalty. Masuria, the self-proclaimed boss of bosses, views Luciano as a rising asset but also as a potential threat. He demands absolute obedience from his young lieutenant, insisting that the old ways must be protected at any cost. Maranzano, equally traditional but more cunning, begins courting Luciano from afar, seeing in him the intelligence that Masuria undervalues. Luciano, caught between two old-world titans, recognizes a truth neither of them can see. This war is the dying gasp of a tradition that cannot survive the modern world. The so-called murder of the Mustache Petes is not a single event but a gradual dismantling of the old guard. It begins with small, strategic moves. Luciano quietly strengthens alliances with younger gangsters, men who share his vision of a unified, business-oriented underworld. Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia. These men understand that profit matters more than Sicilian pride. They see that ethnic boundaries only limit opportunity. They embrace Luciano's ideology not because he forces them to, but because he articulates the future they all secretly crave. The old bosses see only disobedience where Luciano sees progress. They mistake evolution for betrayal. They cannot comprehend why a young Sicilian would choose to work with Jews, why he would treat an Irish bootlegger as an equal, or why he respects the strategic brilliance of men who share none of his heritage. To them, the underworld is tribal. To Luciano, it is a market. And markets cannot survive if divided by ancient grudges. The actual breaking point begins when Masuria pushes too far. He grows increasingly paranoid, punishing anyone he suspects of disloyalty. He accuses Luciano of being too friendly with outside groups, too independent, too ambitious. Masuria believes he can intimidate Luciano back into submission. Instead, he pushes him toward a decision that will change the course of American organized crime forever. Luciano realizes that as long as the old bosses remain, no true stability, or prosperity, can exist. The Mustache Petes are not protectors of tradition, they are obstacles to progress. The plan to eliminate Mafia is executed with chilling precision. Luciano agrees to meet him at a Coney Island restaurant, presenting an image of loyalty and reconciliation. While Luciano excuses himself from the table, gunmen, Anastasia, Siegel, Genovese, and others, storm the restaurant and end Mafia's reign in a matter of seconds. Newspapers will later describe it as a storm of bullets, a sudden violent end to a man who believed himself untouchable. For Luciano, it is the necessary removal of a crumbling pillar. But the revolution does not end there. After Mafia's death, Maranzano declares himself the new boss of bosses, repeating the exact mistakes of his predecessor. He reorganizes the Mafia with impressive structure but ruins it with tyranny. He places spies everywhere, plans Luciano's assassination, and believes that fear alone can cement his rule. Luciano, who respects Maranzano for his intelligence but despises his authoritarianism, realizes he must strike again. The old world will not die quietly. It must be pushed into the grave. In September 1931, Maranzano's empire collapses in a single afternoon. Disguised federal agents, actually hitmen loyal to Luciano, enter his office and stab and shoot him before he can execute his plans. With Maranzano dead, the final chains of the old world system snap. The mustache Petes, the last guardians of Sicilian rigidity, are gone. Yet what makes this moment extraordinary is not the violence itself, but the psychology behind it. Luciano does not kill for power alone. He kills for transformation. He kills to eliminate a worldview that has kept the Mafia trapped in tribal conflict and self-destruction. In destroying the mustache Petes, Luciano is not committing murder in the traditional sense. He is committing a revolution. He is burying the past to free the future. After the old guard falls, the underworld does not descend into chaos, it stabilizes. Younger leaders step forward, eager to embrace a new system. Luciano's vision, which once seemed radical, becomes the foundation of modern organized crime. The removal of the mustache Petes is not an act of betrayal, it is an act of evolution. It marks the moment the American Mafia truly begins. The murder of the mustache Petes is at its core the rejection of archaic rules and the birth of a new doctrine, one shaped by business, not blood, strategy, not superstition, innovation, not stagnation. It is the transformation of crime from a tribal feud to a multinational enterprise. And it is the moment Luciano stops being a rising gangster and becomes the man who will redefine an entire criminal civilization. The birth of the commission does not begin with a grand meeting or a dramatic announcement. It begins in the quiet spaces between wars, in the minds of men who have grown tired of watching blood drain into the gutters of New York. When Mafia and Maranzano fall, the underworld stands at a crossroads. The old world has collapsed, but the new one has yet to be defined. It is here, in this fragile moment of uncertainty, that lucky Luciano steps forward, not as a warlord claiming victory, but as a strategist offering stability. He understands that power gained through murder only lasts until the next ambitious challenger appears. But power gained through structure, through organization, diplomacy, and shared interests, can last generations. For decades, the Mafia operated as a feudal system, a collection of scattered kingdoms ruled by stubborn bosses who answered to no one but their own pride. There was no central authority, no mechanism for resolving disputes, no system for sharing territory or profits. Every conflict escalated into war because there was no higher court to appeal to, no neutral party to mediate. Luciano sees this clearly. The Mafia does not need a king, it needs a system. A council. A board of directors. Something that reflects the businesslike nature of American crime rather than the fragmented traditions of Sicily. This idea is not inspired by Italian culture. It is inspired by American capitalism. Luciano observes how corporations operate, how banks and stock exchanges function, how unions negotiate, and how politicians build coalitions. He sees that the world outside the underworld runs on interlocking structures, shared authority, and calculated cooperation. To him, the Mafia is simply an industry that needs management. And so, he imagines an organization that can prevent wars before they happen, regulate profit distribution, oversee national operations, and enforce rules that benefit everyone, not just a single boss. The first step is bringing the families together. Luciano organizes discreet meetings with leaders from different factions. Vincent Mangano, Joe Bonanno, Tommy Gagliano, and Joe Prophesy. These men, relieved that the chaos of the Castellamarese War has finally ended, listen with unusual openness. They recognize that Luciano is not proposing domination. He is proposing balance, equality, predictability. For the first time in Mafia history, A man is offering peace without demanding submission. His charisma, intelligence, and reputation for fairness win them over. The younger generation sees in him not a tyrant but a visionary. With their support, Luciano divides the New York underworld into 5 distinct families. Each family will control its own territory and operations but will be accountable to a central governing body. This is the birth of the Commission, a council where bosses can resolve disputes, vote on policies, and maintain order. Decisions will be made collectively, and no single boss will ever again hold supreme power. The concept is radical in its simplicity. Shared authority prevents unilateral madness. Shared profit prevents jealousy. Shared rules prevent war. But the genius of the Commission lies not just in its structure. It lies in the psychological shift it forces upon the Mafia. For the first time, gangsters must think beyond personal vendettas and ancient grudges. They must consider long-term consequences, economic efficiency, and strategic alliances. Luciano transforms the Mafia from a reactive organization into a proactive one. Crime is no longer a series of disconnected rackets. It becomes a national enterprise with division of labor, standardized rules, and collective governance. The underworld, for the first time, becomes a coherent system. To reinforce unity, Luciano invites not only Italians but also Jewish leaders like Meyer Lansky and Dutch Schultz, before Schultz's recklessness forces his removal. He believes that excluding non-Italians weakens the entire operation. Partnering with Lansky and other influential figures gives the Mafia access to financial intelligence, political contacts, and nationwide networks. While the Commission remains Italian in structure, its operations become multicultural, reflecting Luciano's belief that success in America depends on cooperation, not tribalism. This is a direct challenge to the old world mentality that dominated before him. But the mustache Petes are gone, and their traditions have been buried with them. The Commission's early meetings focus on establishing rules that will prevent future chaos. No more unsanctioned murders. No more territorial wars. No more impulsive decisions based on ego. Any execution of a high-ranking figure must be approved collectively. Any major business venture must be communicated to the group. Disputes must be resolved diplomatically, with violence used only as a last resort. These rules sound simple, but they represent a profound philosophical shift. The Mafia is no longer guided by emotion, it is guided by strategy. Luciano also enforces a separation between criminal operations and leadership roles. Bosses must remain distant from violent acts, focusing instead on management. This protects them legally and increases their longevity. Under his guidance, soldiers and capo regimes handle the dirty work, while bosses negotiate territory, profits, and political influence. This model mirrors legitimate corporate structures, with clear chains of command and defined responsibilities. As the Commission gains traction, its influence expands beyond New York. Families in Chicago, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Detroit recognize its value. They see that Luciano's system offers something no mobster has ever achieved: national coordination. The Mafia becomes a network instead of a patchwork. Profits increase. Arrest rates drop. Violence decreases. For the first time, organized crime is truly organized. Yet what makes the Commission extraordinary is not just its functionality, it is the psychological transformation it demands from its members. It forces mobsters to trust structure more than superstition, diplomacy more than intimidation, and collective interest more than individual pride. It elevates crime from a blood feud culture to a form of governance. And Luciano, who stands at the center of this transformation, knows that this system will outlive him. He does not build the Commission for personal glory. He builds it to create stability in a world where instability has always been the norm. But this new system does not eliminate ambition or rivalry. It merely manages it. Luciano understands that men driven by power cannot be changed, they can only be channeled. The Commission channels ambition into negotiation, rivalry into economic competition, and conflict into structured dialogue. It is not a utopia, it is a controlled battlefield. The birth of the Commission is the moment the American Mafia stops being a collection of gangs and becomes an institution. It is the moment tradition yields to innovation. It is the moment the underworld becomes a kingdom without a king, governed instead by strategy, cooperation, and cold calculation. And at the center of this new world sits Lucky Luciano, the architect who reshaped crime itself into a system that would endure for decades, long after the men who founded it faded into history. The expansion of Luciano's empire after the formation of the Commission does not feel like a sudden eruption of power. It unfolds like a calculated unfolding of a blueprint he has been refining since his teenage years. With the old world bosses gone and a new structure in place, Luciano finally has the freedom to do what he always envisioned: transform crime from a collection of scattered rackets into a unified, national industry. It is in this period that the underworld shifts from local turf disputes to a sophisticated network spanning major cities, international ports, and even foreign governments. This is no longer crime as the public imagines it. This is crime as a corporate empire. The first pillar of this expanding web is gambling. Gambling is not just a racket, it is a psychology. People risk money for hope, for thrill, for escape, and Luciano understands this better than anyone. In New York, he streamlines illegal gambling operations, turning chaotic backroom games into regulated enterprises. But his vision is bigger than the city's alleys. He pushes into Florida, where Lansky helps establish connections with resort owners, police departments, and local politicians. Soon, Miami and Tampa become fertile grounds for high-stakes gambling, feeding millions into the syndicate's pockets. From there, the network stretches southward into Cuba. Havana becomes a paradise of opportunity, a place with lax regulation, corruptible politicians, luxurious hotels, and a glamorous nightlife perfectly suited for laundering money. Lansky takes the lead here, but Luciano's influence is unmistakable. Together, they develop casinos that rival Las Vegas long before Vegas becomes what it is today. They cultivate ties with Cuban officials, ensuring their operations remain protected. In Havana, the American underworld becomes an international entity, blending tourism, gambling, smuggling, and political manipulation into one interconnected web. Parallel to this, narcotics emerge as a controversial but highly profitable venture. While Luciano publicly claims to avoid the drug trade, evidence suggests he oversees its structure from a distance. He implements strict rules to prevent mass involvement: only trusted men handle shipments, and only specific territories may distribute. This system keeps profits high while minimizing unnecessary exposure. Through ports in New York, New Orleans, and Montreal, the network quietly imports heroin that moves through carefully controlled channels. The profits become astronomical, helping the syndicate finance political bribes, legal defenses, and expansions into other industries. Las Vegas becomes another jewel in the syndicate's growing crown, not yet the glittering empire it would one day become, but already a fertile landscape of opportunity. While early development begins before Luciano's exile, he plays a fundamental role in laying the foundation. Through connections with Siegel and others, he ensures that funds from East Coast operations flow westward, financing casinos, hotels, and entertainment venues. Where the desert once stretched empty and silent, buildings begin to rise, monuments to the syndicate's ambition. Even after Siegel's murder, the blueprint remains intact, and the city continues to grow along lines Luciano helped draw. Beyond gambling and narcotics, Hell's Kitchen union rackets and labor infiltration form another major part of the web. The syndicate does not simply bribe union bosses, they take over unions from the inside. Dock workers, truckers, construction crews, hotel staff, and longshoremen all fall under the syndicate's influence. This creates a shadow economy where strikes, deliveries, and construction projects can be controlled by a single phone call. Politicians seek Luciano's favor because he can move entire industries like chess pieces. Business owners fear disappointing him because a labor strike might suddenly cripple their operations. Power is no longer just in bullets, it is in influence. One of Luciano's greatest strengths is identifying talent. He orchestrates the expansion not by micromanaging every detail but by delegating to the right men. Lansky manages financial operations with the precision of a mathematician. Costello navigates the political world with charm, subtlety, and insider connections. Anastasia oversees enforcement, using fear as a psychological weapon rather than a reckless one. Genovese, when loyal, handles delicate international arrangements. Luciano positions himself at the center, not as a dictator but as a coordinator, ensuring each sector feeds into the greater syndicate. The network grows not just geographically but structurally. Protection schemes evolve from crude extortion into refined business relationships. Businesses pay not just for protection from violence but for guaranteed supply chains, labor stability, and access to black market goods. Politicians are not bribed with simple envelopes. They are given long-term arrangements that benefit both sides. Judges, police chiefs, mayors, and senators all find themselves entangled in webs of favors, debts, and mutual advantage. Luciano's influence seeps into the fabric of American institutions, blending legality with illegality until the line is nearly invisible. Yet what makes this expansion truly revolutionary is not the money, it is the coordination. Before Luciano, criminal enterprises operated like independent organs. Under him, they function like a circulatory system, pumping money, information, and influence across the country. New York connects to New Jersey. New Jersey connects to Philadelphia. Philadelphia connects to Chicago. Chicago connects to Kansas City. Vegas connects to Los Angeles. Every family, every crew, every racket becomes a node in a vast, evolving map. Luciano's syndicate is not a gang, it is an organism. But with expansion comes complexity. Every new city introduces new personalities, new conflicts, and new risks. Luciano must constantly negotiate tensions between Jewish and Italian leaders, between traditionalists and modernists, between ambitious young capos and cautious older bosses. He must manage sudden crises, a shipment seized at the dock, a politician demanding too much money, a rival threatening to disrupt peace, a hitman going rogue. But his genius lies in staying calm, analyzing situations with cold precision, and choosing solutions that preserve long-term stability even at short-term cost. The web expands because Luciano understands something simple. Power must be spread to survive. Centralized power invites rebellion. Shared power invites cooperation. Every new territory added to the network strengthens the syndicate, but also strengthens the bonds between its members. Each family benefits from the others. Each city's success becomes the foundation for more success. The syndicate grows not through conquest but through coordination. By the peak of his influence, Luciano's criminal network is unlike anything the world has seen. It spans continents, industries, government offices, and social classes. It operates like a business, negotiates like a government, and enforces like a military. And at the center stands Luciano, not as a tyrant, but as the architect of a system so refined that it will outlive him by decades. The web he builds is not just a collection of illegal ventures. It is a new world order in the underworld, a silent machine powered by money, loyalty, psychology, and structure. It is the realization of a vision he carried from the start, an empire of organized crime that runs not on chaos but on strategy. An empire whose roots run across America, whose branches reach into Cuba and beyond, and whose influence reshapes the very meaning of power. This is the syndicate. This is Luciano's creation. And this is the moment the American underworld becomes not just powerful, but unstoppable. Loyalty in Luciano's world is never simple. It is a currency, a weapon, a philosophy, and at times a fatal illusion. As the syndicate grows and the criminal landscape evolves, the alliances Luciano forges become as dangerous as the enemies he creates. Power does not exist in a vacuum, it reshapes everything around it. Every man drawn into Luciano's orbit brings his own ambition, ego, fears, and grudges. This section of his life is defined not by expansion alone, but by the delicate balance between friendship and rivalry, trust and suspicion, unity and betrayal. To understand Luciano's true genius, one must understand how he manages relationships with men who can either elevate him or destroy him. Among his closest allies, Meyer Lansky stands at the forefront. Lansky is more than a partner. He is the counterweight to Luciano's charisma. Where Luciano sees people, Lansky sees numbers. Where Luciano negotiates, Lansky calculates. Their friendship, forged on the brutal streets of Manhattan, grows into a bond rooted not in ethnicity but in shared philosophy. Lansky believes in the modern vision of organized crime just as strongly as Luciano does. Their dynamic is simple. Luciano handles diplomacy, politics, and leadership. Lansky handles money, logistics, and long-term planning. In many ways, Lansky is the architect behind the scenes, ensuring that the empire remains financially stable even when its leaders are wrestling with internal strife. Their alliance is one of the most productive in the history of the American underworld, built on mutual respect and an almost intuitive understanding of each other's strengths. Bugsy Siegel, on the other hand, is the spark in the powder keg. Charming, fearless, and often reckless, Siegel is the man Luciano trusts when he needs direct action. He is the blade to Luciano's mind, the one who turns strategy into reality. Yet Siegel's unpredictability makes him both valuable and dangerous. He is fiercely loyal but prone to impulsive violence, and his ambition often pushes him into dangerous waters. Luciano cares for him like a brother, aware that Siegel's volatility can both serve and sabotage the syndicate. Siegel becomes a reminder that even allies can be double-edged swords, useful in battle but capable of drawing blood from anyone too close. Another key figure is Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the underworld. Unlike Siegel, Costello is calm, refined, and politically connected. He moves through high society with ease, blending into luxurious hotel lobbies, political fundraisers, and elite clubs where laws are written behind closed doors. Costello becomes the syndicate's diplomatic face, charming judges, influencing elections, and securing protection that money alone cannot buy. Luciano trusts him because Costello does not crave the spotlight. He craves stability. Yet even Costello's smooth demeanor hides an undercurrent of ambition. He knows that loyalty to Luciano is in his best interest, but like all powerful men, he keeps his own future in mind. Albert Anastasia is another pivotal figure, the embodiment of violence honed into discipline. Known as the Lord High Executioner, Anastasia controls Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm of the syndicate. His loyalty to Luciano is rooted in respect for his leadership, but Anastasia's brutality makes him unpredictable in a different way. He is not reckless like Siegel. He is cold and efficient, a man whose moral compass is guided entirely by obedience and fear. Luciano understands that Anastasia is a necessity, violence keeps order when diplomacy fails, but he also knows that a man who is feared by everyone can never be fully controlled. Yet the most complex relationship in Luciano's life is with Vito Genovese. Genovese is ambitious, cunning, and ruthless, too similar to Luciano in some ways and too dangerous in others. While Luciano dreams of a cooperative network built on shared interests, Genovese dreams of absolute power. He sees himself as the rightful leader, resentful of answering to anyone. Luciano recognizes Genovese's potential but also senses the threat he poses. Their relationship becomes a tense dance between necessity and rivalry. Genovese supports Luciano publicly but undermines him privately, waiting for the perfect opportunity to ascend. Luciano sees the danger but tolerates him, believing that controlling Genovese is better than forcing him into open rebellion. These allies form the core of the syndicate, but the underworld is filled with figures who present both opportunity and danger. Dutch Schultz, for example, is a talented earner but also a ticking time bomb. Schultz refuses to follow rules, threatens politicians, and acts as if the syndicate structure does not apply to him. Luciano sees the threat immediately. When Schultz demands permission to assassinate prosecutor Thomas Dewey, a move that would bring federal wrath upon the entire underworld, the commission denies him. Schultz defies the decision, setting himself on a collision course with Luciano's system. His recklessness eventually forces the syndicate to remove him, demonstrating that even powerful earners are expendable when they endanger the collective. Luciano's enemies evolve alongside his allies. Law enforcement figures like Thomas Dewey and J. Edgar Hoover become relentless forces seeking to dismantle his empire. Politicians who once accepted bribes become liabilities as public pressure mounts. Rival gangsters, jealous of Luciano's influence, attempt subtle power plays that threaten the fragile stability he created. Every room Luciano enters contains hidden tension. Every conversation carries dual meanings, one spoken aloud, one buried under layers of strategy. What makes this period remarkable is not the presence of enemies, but Luciano's ability to navigate the spaces between friendship and rivalry. He understands that every ally can become an enemy and every enemy can become useful under the right circumstances. He reads personalities with the same precision he reads business opportunities. He knows when to charm, when to discipline, when to negotiate, and when to eliminate. His leadership is not built solely on loyalty, it is built on understanding human nature. Luciano's alliances are strategic, not emotional. He connects with men who complement his strengths, fill gaps in his power, and extend the syndicate's reach. But he never fully trusts anyone. Not even Lansky. Not even Costello. Not even the men who owe him their lives. He trusts only the system he created, the structure that ensures stability even when people betray it. This era of allies and enemies becomes a psychological battlefield. Luciano must constantly evaluate who is with him, who is against him, and who pretends to be both. He must soothe egos, contain violence, and maintain the illusion of unity even as ambition brews beneath the surface. The syndicate's greatest strength, its network of powerful personalities, becomes its greatest vulnerability. Yet Luciano holds it all together through charisma, intelligence, and a calm understanding of the one truth that governs the criminal world. Loyalty is a performance. Some men act loyal to gain power. Some act loyal to survive. Some act loyal because they believe in the vision. But true loyalty, genuine, unwavering loyalty, is rare. And Luciano's genius lies in never mistaking the performance for the man behind it. In the end, his relationships shape the empire as much as his strategies do. His allies elevate him. His enemies challenge him. His rivals sharpen him. And the fragile balance between them all becomes the heartbeat of an underworld that teeters between unity and collapse. This is the era when Luciano proves not just his power, but his understanding of people. And in the world of organized crime, that understanding is the difference between a leader who rises and a leader who survives. The hidden war that unfolds around Lucky Luciano is not fought on open streets with Tommy guns and getaway cars. It is fought in offices, backrooms, court halls, and newspaper columns. It is a war waged in whispers, documents, secret meetings, political alliances, and psychological pressure. This battle is not about territory or gambling profits. It is about survival. As Luciano's empire grows too large, too sophisticated, and too influential, it attracts the attention of a different kind of enemy, one with badges, judges, voters, headlines, and the growing power of public outrage. By the mid-1930s, the national mood begins shifting. Prohibition has ended, and with it, the public's tolerance for organized criminal activity starts to wane. Politicians, desperate to prove their strength, turn to crime fighting as a path to popularity. Newspapers begin framing mob bosses as symbols of corruption poisoning American society. This new wave of scrutiny is not driven by morality, it is driven by political opportunity. And no figure symbolizes the underworld's reach more than Lucky Luciano. Thomas E. Dewey emerges as the spearhead of this movement. Ambitious, relentless, and fiercely intelligent, Dewey becomes the face of law enforcement's crusade against organized crime. To Dewey, Luciano is not just a criminal, he is a stepping stone to future political glory. Every victory against the syndicate gives Dewey more visibility, more applause, and more influence. He understands that taking down Luciano will not only cripple the underworld but also catapult him into the national spotlight. Dewey's strategy is methodical. He avoids going after Luciano for crimes that lack evidence. Instead, he targets something harder to defend: prostitution. At first glance, prosecuting Luciano for prostitution seems absurd. He is not known as a pimp, and he is far removed from the street-level operations. But Dewey recognizes a legal truth. If he can link Luciano to any part of a criminal enterprise, he can hold him responsible for the entire organization. The so-called vice racket becomes a weapon, a way to undermine Luciano's powerful public image without needing proof of murder or racketeering. To build his case, Dewey arrests dozens of prostitutes and brothel managers. Many are terrified of speaking against the syndicate, but Dewey uses pressure, protection promises, and the threat of long prison terms to coerce testimony. One by one, women begin naming Luciano as the invisible figure behind the operation. Whether these statements are truthful or not becomes secondary, the narrative gains momentum. Newspapers amplify the accusations, portraying Luciano as a manipulative mastermind profiting off the exploitation of women. The public, already primed for moral outrage, accepts the story without question. Luciano feels the pressure tightening around him. His political protection begins to erode. Judges who once accepted envelopes of cash now keep their distance. Police officials, worried about Dewey's rising power, stop returning favors. Allies advise him to leave the country, but leaving would make him seem guilty, and Luciano understands perception is as important as truth. He stays, believing his silence and influence will be enough to weather the storm. But Dewey's campaign grows stronger. Wiretaps, surveillance, interrogations. Dewey turns every legal tool into a weapon. Undercover agents infiltrate syndicate-controlled brothels. Prosecutors pressure witnesses until their stories align. Dewey presents Luciano as a tyrant ruling a vast network of vice and corruption. The charges may be exaggerated, but Dewey knows that juries respond to narratives, not nuance. He paints Luciano as the embodiment of everything America wants to purge: greed, violence, immorality, foreign influence. The courtroom becomes a theater, and Dewey directs the play flawlessly. For the first time in years, Luciano finds himself cornered. Not by rivals but by public opinion. Not by hitmen but by headlines. Not by bullets but by legal strategy. The hidden war is psychological. Dewey is attacking Luciano's image, dismantling the aura of invincibility that has shielded him for so long. The man who once controlled the underworld through charm and fear now finds those same qualities turned against him. Prosecutors cite his charm as manipulation, his diplomacy as conspiracy, his strategic mind as evidence of orchestrating crime. Inside the syndicate, fear begins to spread. Some allies whisper about distancing themselves. Some wonder whether Luciano's arrest will fracture the empire. Others begin plotting quietly, seeing opportunity in his potential downfall. The underworld runs on strength, and even the slightest perception of weakness can shift loyalties. Luciano must now fight two wars: one against Dewey and one against the shifting tides within his own organization. Under intense investigation, Luciano maintains his composure. He denies all accusations, refuses to turn on anyone, and projects confidence even as his world narrows. But behind the calm exterior, he recognizes the scale of the threat. Dewey is not like corrupt police commissioners or greedy politicians. Dewey is a true believer, or at least plays the part convincingly. He wants Luciano not just arrested, but dismantled, humiliated, erased. The hidden war escalates when Dewey moves to arrest Luciano. The police raid his favorite hotels, restaurants, and meeting spots. Luciano escapes briefly to Hot Springs, Arkansas, seeking refuge with local connections. But Dewey's influence reaches further than expected. The governor of Arkansas ignores prior agreements, and law enforcement hands Luciano over without hesitation. Luciano realizes that the political tide has turned completely. His old network of favors and alliances cannot save him this time. The courtroom becomes the final battleground. Dewey stands as the relentless prosecutor, Luciano as the calm defendant. Each witness who steps forward is a blow to Luciano's reputation. Each headline is another nail in the coffin. The once invincible boss is now portrayed as a manipulative villain exploiting vulnerable women. Regardless of the truth, the narrative is powerful enough to sway public opinion, and eventually, the jury. The hidden war has a single defining truth. Power that depends on invisibility collapses when dragged into the light. Luciano's empire thrives in the shadows, where deals are made quietly and influence flows silently. Dewey's campaign forces that empire into the open, exposing it to the scrutiny of law, morality, and public outrage. Once exposed, even the strongest syndicates show their fractures. By the time the trial begins, Luciano already knows he has lost the war. Not because he is guilty, but because Dewey has built an unstoppable political machine driven by ambition and fueled by fear. Luciano, who controlled the underworld with intelligence and structure, now finds himself entangled in a different structure, one he cannot manipulate. The hidden war ends not with gunfire but with a verdict. And it marks the beginning of a downfall that no amount of strategy, charisma, or influence can reverse. This is the moment when Luciano learns the ultimate lesson. In the modern world, the greatest threat to a criminal empire is not rival gangs, it is the power of narrative, the machinery of the state, and the relentless ambition of men who see your downfall as their pathway to glory. Prison does not break Lucky Luciano the way the prosecution expects. It does not strip him of power, nor does it reduce him to another inmate swallowed by the system. Instead, prison becomes a new environment for him to navigate, another underworld, another hierarchy, another stage on which he can rebuild influence from the inside. When the heavy doors of Clinton Correctional Facility first shut behind him, he feels the weight of confinement, the claustrophobic sense of having his world suddenly shrink. But Luciano has survived far worse. He has risen from poverty, war, betrayal, and assassination attempts. A prison cell is not the end of his empire, it is simply a shift in battlefield. The guards expect him to plead, panic, or lash out. Instead, he behaves like a man studying the terrain. The first few weeks he walks the yard in silence, watching how inmates move, who controls what, who respects whom, and who fears whom. Prison, like the streets, is an ecosystem with its own rules, power brokers, and tensions. Luciano has spent his life learning to read people, and here the signs are even clearer. There is a pecking order among inmates, informal leadership, smuggling routes, gambling circles, black market trades. These smaller structures mirror the outside world in miniature. To a strategist's mind it feels familiar. At first, Luciano keeps his distance. He knows that immediate involvement in prison politics would signal desperation. Instead, he observes how guards respond to conflict, who takes bribes, which inmates have influence, and who seeks protection. Within weeks, he understands the internal currents better than most men who have served years. The prison's unofficial hierarchy shifts subtly as inmates recognize who he is. Not just a mobster but the mobster, the man who reorganized the entire American underworld. Some approach him with respect. Others with fear. A few with envy. Luciano notices everything but commits to nothing too quickly. What surprises both prison officials and inmates is how calm, polite, and almost gentle Luciano appears. He is neither arrogant nor aggressive. He does not demand special treatment, though he quietly receives it. Guards treat him differently, not because they are ordered to but because they know who he is. Some want favors, some want stories, and some simply fear the consequences of disrespecting him. Luciano is courteous but distant, never giving too much of himself, always maintaining the aura of control that made him powerful outside. Despite being behind bars, he does not sever his connection to the syndicate. Visitors begin arriving, lawyers, associates, and trusted lieutenants like Frank Costello. They meet in supervised rooms, speaking in coded language, discussing business matters disguised as personal or legal issues. Guards often listen in, but Luciano has mastered communication through implication. A sentence about weather may hint at political climate. A comment about construction may signal an expansion. A nod may authorize a major decision. Frank Costello becomes the main conduit between Luciano and the outside world. Costello handles political connections, bribes, and negotiations, while Vito Genovese, before fleeing to Italy, tries to position himself as the new power. Luciano watches these internal shifts carefully. He knows that without guidance, the syndicate he built could crumble or fragment. But he also knows that direct control is impossible. Instead, he governs through influence. Costello respects his judgment. Lansky maintains loyalty. Anastasia remains an enforcer aligned with his vision. These men keep the empire stable, though not unchanged. Within prison, Luciano gradually gains a quiet authority. He does not rule through violence, he rarely needs to. He gains favors through subtle generosity, helping a guard secure a promotion, ensuring an inmate's family receives money, diffusing tensions before they erupt into riots. The respect he earns is not loud or theatrical. It is whispered, exchanged, and increasingly widespread. By his second year, Luciano has become an unofficial mediator, the man inmates approach when conflicts arise. Even guards consult him privately, seeking advice on controlling volatile prisoners or managing rumors. Prison staff begin calling him Charlie, with a surprising affection, though they always maintain a respectful distance. But beneath this calm, Luciano experiences internal conflict. He is not immune to the psychological weight of imprisonment. Some nights, alone in his cell, he feels the sting of isolation. He thinks of the life he built, the power he once held, the freedom he enjoyed. He thinks of betrayal, not only by the witnesses who testified but by the system he believed he could manipulate indefinitely. He reflects on the irony of his downfall. He was not imprisoned for murder, extortion, or racketeering, but for a crime he had little direct involvement in. The injustice gnaws at him, but he buries his anger beneath a veneer of stoic composure. Losing control of his emotions is something he cannot afford, not here, not ever. As years pass, Luciano begins noticing a shift in the world beyond the prison walls. The syndicate continues to evolve without him. His influence remains, but it softens as new leaders assert themselves. Genovese maneuvers for power, using Luciano's absence as an opportunity. Anastasia becomes more volatile. Costello grows more politically connected. Lansky expands operations globally. Luciano feels pride, anxiety, and frustration all at once. He built these men. He shaped them. But now he watches from behind bars as they interpret, and sometimes neglect, the principles he established. World War II becomes an unexpected turning point. The American government, desperate to protect the East Coast from sabotage and ensure secure shipping lines, seeks help from the very man it once condemned. Naval intelligence agents approach Luciano secretly, exploring whether he can use his influence to secure the New York docks. In exchange, they hint at leniency. Luciano understands the significance immediately. Power has shifted again, and he is no longer merely a prisoner. He is a resource. Operation Underworld, though still shrouded in myth, offers Luciano a way to prove his value to the same government that branded him a public enemy. Through intermediaries, he directs the cooperation of dockworkers and unions, ensuring that wartime logistics remain unimpeded. Whether motivated by loyalty, patriotism, or self-interest, Luciano participates because he sees the larger implication: redemption or at least reconsideration. This cooperation shifts public perception, if only slightly. Politicians who once praised Dewey's crusade now quietly acknowledge Luciano's usefulness. Some push for his sentence to be reduced. Others argue that his deportation after release is necessary. Luciano watches the political tide turn with interest but no desperation. Patience has become his greatest weapon. Inside the prison, guards and officials begin treating him with even more respect, aware that his value to the war effort has elevated him from notorious inmate to reluctant ally of the state. Luciano never brags about this shift. Instead, he maintains humility, knowing that humility itself becomes a form of influence. He begins thinking about the future. Life after prison, life outside America, life without direct control of the empire he built. What defines Luciano's time behind bars is not the severity of his sentence, but the clarity it brings. He reflects on the nature of power, how it expands, how it contracts, how it transforms with circumstance. He realizes that true leadership is not about physical presence but about legacy. He considers which men will carry his vision forward and which will distort it. He assesses who among his allies will remain loyal when he is gone, and who will betray him the moment he steps aside. Prison becomes the crucible in which he studies the next generation of gangsters from a safe distance. By the time the government commutes his sentence, primarily due to wartime assistance, Luciano is not the same man who entered those gates. He is sharper, wiser, and more introspective. Yet he is also more aware of fragility. He understands that influence fades when distance grows. He knows his return to power will not be simple. And he understands that deportation will cut him off from the empire he spent a lifetime creating. But he also knows something else. Even behind bars he remained a leader. He remained a strategist. He remained the man others looked to for guidance, even those charged with guarding him. Prison did not extinguish his power, it merely changed its form. In the quiet, controlled world of iron bars and concrete walls, Luciano proved that true power lies not in a throne, but in the mind that can rule even when the throne is gone. Exile hits Luciano in a way prison never could. When he is deported to Italy, he steps into a homeland that no longer feels like home and a world he no longer controls. Naples becomes both a refuge and a cage. Its cafes, narrow alleys, and crowded docks a reminder of the freedom he once commanded in New York. Watched constantly by Italian authorities, he rebuilds influence quietly, offering advice to smugglers, businessmen, and young mafiosi who view him as a legend. His brief trip to Havana gives him one last taste of power, but pressure forces him back to Italy, ending any hope of returning to the center of the syndicate. In his final years, he drifts between nostalgia and reflection, realizing that the empire he built now evolves without him. Exile humbles him, but it also clarifies a truth he cannot escape. Power fades, but its consequences endure. Luciano's legacy extends far beyond the crimes he committed. He reshaped the Mafia into a structured, business-like system that outlived him by decades. The commission he created became the backbone of American organized crime, preventing unnecessary wars and establishing rules that governed entire cities. His alliances across ethnic lines modernized the underworld, influencing everything from gambling networks to political corruption. But his legacy is complicated. Some hail him as a visionary. Others condemn him as a manipulative criminal who masked brutality with intelligence. His innovations empowered future bosses, but also enabled new forms of exploitation and violence. Even law enforcement evolved in response to the systems he built. In death, Luciano becomes myth, part strategist, part villain, part reluctant reformer. His influence seeps into films, books, and global organized crime structures. Whether admired or feared, one truth remains: no mobster shaped the underworld more than Lucky Luciano. The conclusion of Lucky Luciano's story unfolds not with the roar of gunfire or the spectacle of courtroom drama, but with a quiet, reflective aura, one that forces us to confront the paradoxes embedded in his life. In his final years, living in exile in Naples, Luciano becomes a man suspended between myth and memory. He walks through the old streets with a slow, deliberate grace, a man once feared and respected now reduced to a solitary figure who carries the weight of an empire in his shadow. His presence draws curious stares, whispers, and the occasional brave admirer, but the world he once commanded has moved on. Power, once so palpable, now exists only as a fading echo. As Luciano ages, introspection begins to replace ambition. He thinks often of New York, the neon lights, the backroom meetings, the alliances forged in smoke-filled bars. Those memories are sharp, vibrant, and painful, reminders of a time when he shaped destinies with a single decision. Yet now, sitting at a small cafe table overlooking the harbor, he feels like a spectator watching a story he once starred in. He recognizes the irony. The man who created a self-sustaining criminal system was eventually consumed by it. The commission continued without him. Men rose, men fell, wars erupted, and settlements formed, none requiring his presence or approval. He built a machine that could survive its creator. Still, Luciano does not drown in regret. He studies his life with a strategist's mind, dissecting the decisions that brought him fame, influence, and downfall. He understands he was both a builder and a destroyer. He brought order to a world defined by chaos, yet that order was built on intimidation, extortion, and blood. He unified the underworld, yet unity also empowered dictators, sparked rivalries, and expanded criminal reach. He modernized crime, but in doing so, he helped elevate it into a force that shaped cities, politics, and economies. His legacy is neither purely heroic nor villainous. It is a complex tapestry of ambition and consequence. As the years pass, Luciano's myth grows even as his physical presence diminishes. Newspapers in America still print his name. Hollywood circles discuss new films about his life. Young gangsters whisper stories about his brilliance, real or exaggerated. He becomes immortalized as a symbol, the man who changed everything. Yet this immortality brings him little comfort. He knows that legends are often distortions, shaped not by truth but by need. Some portray him as a mastermind, others as a monster. He lived his life in shadows, and the shadows continue to shape his memory. On the day of his death at the Naples airport, he is meeting a producer eager to turn his story into film, a final attempt to reclaim control of his narrative. But Luciano's heart gives out before he can speak his version. In that instant he becomes fully myth, his voice silenced, his story left incomplete. The world is left to interpret him without the clarity only he could provide. In the end, Luciano's story reminds us of the duality of power. It is intoxicating, transformative, and deeply fragile. He built an empire, reshaped the underworld, and influenced generations. Yet he also died alone, far from the streets he mastered, held up not by soldiers or allies, but by the lingering fascination of history. His revolution was silent. His influence was undeniable. And his story, even in its conclusion, refuses to fade.